For Henry Repeat. Okay, so I work for Henry Roy PR and I do author interviews and reviews through them on Instagram for book tours. And I'm currently listening to Central City, and I'm about to start reading Journeyman whenever you release it. And I'm enjoying it so far. So I guess the first question I have is, what inspired you to become an author?
Um, it's interesting because I think that when I was young, as a child, I kind of had absentee parents a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways that, I was left on my own a lot. I was left to my own devices and things like that. And one of the ways that I could bridge the gap between where I was and sort of the society around me, the adults that I was engaging and interacting with, was through literature, and you could really read whatever you wanted. And if, other kids weren't allowed to watch the same things,
Mm-hmm.
you could get away with what you read.
Right.
And it became a way for me to access forms of transgression, for me to, look at adult themes and think about them in more complicated ways. And it wasn't, just bubblegum or, like candy for the mind. It was more intense.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that lit a fire in me to be able to do something similar.
Right. What's the most difficult part of your writing process?
Probably patience.
Mm-hmm.
There's like, if I can't speak to anybody else's process, and I know a lot of authors are different and things come differently for them, but for me it might take a year and a half to write a book,
Yeah.
a novel, but it might only take whatever, like 1,200 or 1,500 keyboard hours, right? Like hours sitting down at the keyboard, at the computer, etc. So a lot of things come out when I'm walking my dogs, when I'm like out hiking, or whatever it is that I'm doing, and you jot things down and you have to like leave it and come back.
Yeah.
And it's hard. Like I don't know always. You got to let it germinate, you got to let it grow, and it's hard to know when to say when.
Yeah.
And that for me is the most difficult thing.
That's difficult for me too. I'm in the process of writing a children's book. So yeah, patience is really hard for me.
And when is it done? When is it cooked? Right? Like it could be more, or it could go in a different direction.
Exactly.
But you gotta like wait until it all connects.
Right.
And then make a decision.
Mm-hmm. What comes first for you when you write, the plot or the characters? And why do you feel like that comes first?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's integrated, and and it comes back to the question of patience.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't a plot without the character arc.
Correct.
And there isn't a character without those events happening to the character that demands the character to grow.
Right.
And often what comes first for me, so in these novels, there's a direction I want both King Culpa and Vincent Bayonne to go, not just in Central City or Journeyman or the third book that I'm working on now, but throughout their arc.
Mm-hmm.
There's also an arc for the city itself. So from its point of origin until maybe Right now I'm looking at like maybe 2015 or between 2010 and 2015 as a point of ending. I want the city to go through an arc as well.
Right.
So it becomes like, how can I? So each book has a concept that fits into both of those.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a question of, well, how can I play that out while keeping it in a genre, right? Providing, responding to the expectations of my audience, making sure that I'm giving them a mystery, giving them excitement, proper pacing, and that movement. And then, so arguably, I guess the plot comes last in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Like now that I kind of think about it in that way, the characters came first. The city as a character came first and foremost, and then themes came out of that,
Right.
which then became the plot. Yeah.
What part of Central City and Journeyman was the most fun to write for you?
All right. So in Central City was the music, right?
Right.
So you know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Yeah. It's so there are copyright issues with that. So you have to be kind of creative.
Yeah.
When you're like you can name a song or whatever and say that it's playing in the background because you can't copyright names. But I wanted to bring the flow and rhythm.
Yeah.
Into some of the forms of exposition and like internal dialogue and things like that. And you have to be really careful about that, but also that's kind of a fun exercise as a writer. To mimic syntax, to mimic the rhythm of a song in completely different words, and maintain sometimes rhyme scheme if I can. That's hard, but try to bring that beat and rhythm into the flow. So for Central City, that was the most fun.
Yeah.
For Journeyman, there's one scene. I realize that you haven't gotten there yet, but there's one scene in Journeyman, maybe just past the halfway point or so, where the character of the preacher goes to pick up a payoff, and he's like pulling into a liquor store parking lot, and he sees a parishioner, and he's like waiting for her to leave and watching what's going on, and the exposition is tied to his inner dialogue.
Yeah.
And because it's third person, I was able to do a ton of like religious puns and wordplay on his internal dialogue as a form of self-justification. But what we're seeing through that third person is a ton of irony. And through the puns and the way that I was able to craft it, we hopefully, the readers, the people on the outside, understand the irony and understand that this is a person who's lying to himself and whose entire life is built on that lie.
Yeah.
And it came really easily. Like just kind of came out. And I've never really had that happen. And it was great fun.
What characters in your book are most similar to you or to people you know?
That's tough. I mean, it's tough and it's easy, right? King Culpa is probably the most similar to me, and I hope that's not off-putting. And not so. Right, King Culpa is meant to be an honest criminal, right? Who's a decent human being, but who finds himself in these situations, and has to make those decisions, and is very cold and clear about that process. Vincent Bayonne is a weak policeman, right? He's a preserver character who's trying to preserve society, but he's weak, and struggles with those weaknesses, and struggles with just a discontent, right? Like an inability to make peace with the contradictions between society and his own beliefs. That is something that I really appreciate, but I don't necessarily share. In terms of King Culpa, that cold honesty, and there are aspects of my own background that I built into the character and connections that I made. But the need to find decency in oneself,
Right.
despite one's condition or situation or surroundings, that is very personal to me.
How long did it take you to write Central City and Journeyman?
Well, arguably Central City took me my entire life up to that point, right? It was the first novel that I was able to bring, and first writing project that I was able to bring to that level, where it did all of the things that I wanted to do. And while I still feel like I have space, like a ton of space to grow, right? Clearly, it was, a solid, complete professional work, and something that I'm proud of. But that took my entire life. Working on Journeyman, working on Central City specifically as that project, probably took me 2 years to write or so. While doing other projects and, working on it part-time and so forth. Journeyman didn't take quite as long. The process became quicker and easier, as I went.
Absolutely. If you could meet your characters from either one of those books, what would you say to them?
I would tell them to get back in my books. I don't, because they are, like we just talked about in the previous question about their connection to me. They're both meant to be embodiments of ideas and embodiments of questions that I have about how, a person is situated in society and what our role is and how our role comes up through work. That being said, that would be frightening to meet them.
Absolutely.
Honestly.
Okay. What's your kryptonite as a writer?
I think maybe it's a sense of like social fullness.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel as though my novels are there's a form of isolation in them.
Yeah.
And, and if you read, there are other authors, Russo, I want to say his first name is like James Russo. Mm-hmm. He wrote Nobody's Fool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
If I'm getting his first name correct. He's an author with where there's just the social fullness and vibrancy of the community in all of his novels, and he really does a great job of developing his characters, but also it's all dependent upon the interactions with the characters. And it's obviously those are totally different books than anything I write, but I really appreciate that difference in him. And I know that I don't have, all of my characters experience a form of isolation, and when they're together and interacting, and even in Journeyman, Bayonne has a girlfriend, but even in that relationship, they're at cross purposes and they're talking past each other, and it's constantly chess that everyone is playing with everyone else. And I feel like there's a value in that social fullness. There's a value in bringing a vibrancy to the community. It's just not my bag.
Who do you trust to give you constructive criticism of your work?
So I have 3 editors that I work with, and I trust them as far as it goes. You know what I mean? The reason that I work with 3 different editors is because if if one is saying something and I disagree, you know, I might disagree. If two or more are saying the same thing, whether I disagree or not makes no difference, right? They're onto something, and I need to tackle that. And usually, I mean, I trust all three of them because they're professionals. They're all writers as well, you know, or have a ton of experiences as editors and backgrounds in publishing. And so I always, whenever they give me a criticism, I have to kick it around and make a decision about it and take it seriously. But also, you know, you can't give over your project,
Right.
right? Like I have goals, and it can't become what somebody else wants.
Exactly.
You know, so you have to have multiple voices. Yeah.
Does anyone in your family read your books?
Yeah. Yeah. My wife does. But she reads them at different times, like not always at the tail end, you know, because sometimes, because she always knows what I'm working on.
Yeah.
And she has access to all my stuff. So sometimes she gets in there and reads it before it's fully finished, and then ends up not reading the finished product, you know?
Yeah.
Or will, like, a year later after it's published or something, and then doesn't remember if it's different from what she read before.
If Journeyman were made into a movie, which actors would you have play your characters?
So Adam McKenna, the physical description was actually based on Jonah Hill. But Jonah Hill, like in Superbad or something. And I don't know, you know what I mean? Yeah. I think he's like a totally different person now and has aged out a little bit. And I don't know if it would still work, or if it would, because I actually don't know how old he is. For Kane, I don't know. Because I don't know. There's like a masculinity to Kane that I think you would have found in actors more easily, like in the 70s, right?
Right.
Like a Steve McQueen type. That's me dreaming, right? But I don't know if that computes, like if that carries over for you or not. But that would be great. For Bayonne, maybe like somebody like Timothy Oliphant, who was in Justified in Deadwood. I think he's a little bit older than Bayonne is, at least in Central City and so forth. But being able to play up and down, I think is easy. He's probably in much better. The actor's probably in much better health than Bayonne is. He's like a chain smoking alcoholic.
Yeah. And do you prefer self-publishing your work or going through a publishing company?
So I published through an independent publisher, small press that doesn't have, the resources of a major press. It's very much indie publishing, where I have a lot of control and influence, which also poses issues. So the opportunities that I've had for larger publishing companies did not appear to me to be great opportunities, right? There wasn't a marketing budget included. I wasn't convinced, or what was included as marketing wasn't really spelled out to me in clear ways. But also, the biggest issue was that what I was selling was also the IP. Right, so it was an opportunity to sign on for three books in the series, and with that I would be also trading over my IP at a rate that I wasn't convinced. One, I wasn't convinced they were going to do anything with it. Two, it wasn't a rate where I would see the dividends, or adequate dividends, in my opinion. I think that in today's marketplace, the opportunity to publish through as an independent, right, or through an indie press or self-publish, I think that you can reach an audience if you're willing to put the, and the opportunities are there for you to develop your audience and create greater leverage. And the publishing, like, let's be honest, publishing is incredibly predatory.
Yeah.
Like incredibly predatory. And, you know, agents that have approached me were not, when you ask them, you know, a question like, what's the process that we would go through for this to become a full-time career, right? Like, what are the benchmarks? Like, what steps, signposts do we need to meet? What's this process? What are you going to provide for this? What do I need to provide for this? How can we create this? What's the path?
Yeah.
Honestly, I had an agent who's pitching me, and her response was, get a job teaching. That was honestly verbatim what she said to me on the phone while she's pitching me being my agent.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what are we doing? Why are we even having this conversation?
Correct.
So, you know, I think, and the numbers, I realize that the numbers are rough. Like, they're rugged. The amount per book that you receive, you know, and you can't make any money off of one book. And even like somebody like David Baldacci, where like Absolute Power was incredibly successful, signed a movie deal all within like 2 years. He still, before he left his law firm, he had his second book coming out already, like done and in the can, was working on his third, had a 3-book deal, etc. Like, the numbers just aren't there to make money off of 1 or 2 books.
Right.
That being said, I don't see the loss going with an independent publisher. Because fundamentally, the issue at stake, in my opinion, is that readers and the general public don't trust writers.
Yeah, I see that.
You know what I mean? They think that, you know, books are supposed to be our vegetables, that there's something, you know, either those who agree think you need to read because it's important. Those who don't read think they don't need to read because it's not important.
Exactly.
But they don't trust writers or publishing companies to provide them with an experience of meaning that connects to their lives.
Exactly.
And that's our job to change that. And I don't see it. I think you can change it as an independent, maybe more easily than as a dependent.
Yeah. Absolutely. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about yourself that your readers don't know about you yet?
Yeah. So that we talked briefly about Central City having its own arc. Right. So for those who are interested, you know, you can go to centralcitybooks.com and see that arc, and you can visit each of the neighborhoods. And I finally, you know, built the website out enough that it's really doing the things that I want. And so there are newspaper articles that are written historically that provide a glimpse into that arc, and they connect to things that are happening in the books. You can visit each of the neighborhoods and kind of explore and read more about the history there. There's a timeline that gives the entire chronology, and that timeline has categories that are meant to be sort of the philosophical, conceptual categories of that entire city arc. So to me, it's really cool, and it's really what the books are all about. And while the Copa and Bayonne series is one series that I'm working on within this city, you know, I hope there's a lot more to come to build out the metaphor of the city and what an American city is, what are sort of the historical currents that we've gone through as a society and as a culture, and how does this speak to, you know, bigger issues of sexuality, self-worth, crime, transgression, and meaning, right? Like it comes back to that question of how do we develop and generate meaning in our lives, which is fundamentally the question that each of these characters is asking, him or herself, or trying not to have to ask, right? Trying to avoid. So yeah, check, anybody who wants to, is interested, they can check out centralcitybooks.com, explore more of the world, and I don't know, I think it's cool, and I hope other people do too.
It sounds really cool. I'll have to check it out when we get off of here.
Yeah, please do.
Thank you so much for giving me your time today for this interview. I really enjoyed getting to know you. I'm really enjoying Central City, and I can't wait for Journeyman. It was an honor to talk to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
And you have a great rest of your day.
You too. Bye.